it up there too.
I will put it up there in a second.
So if anybody comments from online, we'll be able to see them.
We'll be able to see it on the big screen. Yeah. All right. So welcome to our weekly basic income discussion group. We've got a handful of people here today, and we have a different topic that we focus on each week. And this week is intellectual property. Intellectual property is near and dear to me because I was reading about intellectual property, and I was actually reading this article that some of us read for today about the history of copyright. When I first kind of like came up with the idea for what I found out later was called basic income. So I was inspired by intellectual property. So I think I want to start by going around the room, and you can pass if you want, but I encourage everyone to say something about how you think or what you think is important about intellectual property, and if you have thoughts about basic income, how you feel like it can relate to basic income. If it relates to basic income. So I told you guys that I was inspired by intellectual property and made me think about basic income. What could that connection possibly be? I'll let you guys know when we get back to me.
Wait, are we supposed to comment on that aspect of it too? The relationship to basic income?
Yeah, intellectual property and the relationship to basic income. If you haven't thought about basic income that much, that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are we starting with me?
Yeah.
So for me, the key issues involved with intellectual property are people having access to the things that give them benefit as much as possible, whether that be books or music or whatever. And on the other side, the making sure that we're still encouraging the generation of those products in the first place, which I guess ultimately gives people more access. So making sure that the songs or movies or whatever are being made that are really benefiting people and people enjoying. How it relates to basic income, I guess one of the ways that many people get their incomes now who are either creative people or kind of in the distribution network is through having copyright protections over intellectual property. So basic income could potentially kind of take the pressure off of that, allow more people to create things through funding that wasn't sort of directly tied to the copyright, and maybe take away the need for people to be earning incomes from distribution if it was no longer necessary. For example, if we could do things online or whatever.
Yeah. Shereel?
Yeah.
I feel like intellectual property is pretty tricky. Speaking of it, actually, I saw this fact that the music industry, the artists only kept about 12% of the revenue from last year. So I mean, that's pretty almost disrespectful. I feel like if I was an artist, they only had 12% of all the money we
That's
made.
low. I was surprised.
Yeah, so and that's anyone big you can think of, Youngson.
Right.
So as opposed as it pertains to basic income, I we probably have a long way to go securing people's intellectual property.
Cool. My thoughts on basic income and intellectual property are linked would be that if a basic income was provided, it would give more people standing to create intellectual property, which I believe is the number one export in America. It is intellectual property, media, creative content. So if you're in poverty, you don't have a chance to create as willingly as someone who comes from generational wealth. Yeah. So if basic income was allotted, it would give people the freedom, in a sense, to be able to focus on creation, which a lot of people are unable to do right now.
Yeah, for sure. Elizabeth.
I sort of similar to things that other people have said. Sort of back to that 12%, like when you were talking about intellectual property, working in academia, what I was thinking about is the ways in which things get paywalled and how the creators themselves aren't the ones who are benefiting.
Right.
But there's the distributors are like, okay, like we have published your work in this journal, and now other people's institutions will pay us exorbitant amounts of money to access that, and how so on one hand, if there's a certain instinctive feeling like, okay, well you created a thing, like you should be able to get some sort of like monetary benefit for the creation of that. In the same way, if you were at a restaurant and you made someone a meal, like you should get some money for that. But the ways in which that often gets distorted, where the creator's not the one getting much in at all.
way I think of basic income and intellectual property is that the government would become the patron instead of having to search for grants and things like that. People wouldn't have to do menial jobs. They could spend their time trying to achieve whatever they want to, like writing a book or painting some drawing or whatever they can focus themselves entirely on whatever it is they see their purpose being.
Yeah, I like that. I'm noticing a thread here. I'm noticing a theme. Yeah, so I think that's right. I think that it gives people more freedom to do creative stuff. Like if you have to go out and work at some job every day that you don't want to be doing, you're not creating art. You're not creating music. But it gives people more freedom if they can say no to that and do what they want with their time. For me, the main connection, and the one I noticed after reading this article, so this is an article about the history of copyright, and it's written by this guy, Carl Fogel, who's an anti-copyright activist. So he's got opinions. Yeah. But it really it jarred me in my thinking, and kind of from a market perspective, I was thinking, wow, we have the technology to distribute all this amazing stuff that people can create, and we have the technology to distribute it for free. Like it's just a few clicks of a mouse button, you can download something or whatever. And yet we have a market for it, and people are paying for it. If it seems like, according to this article, this market should not exist. According to this article, there should be no copyrights, or the laws. There should be no exclusive copyright laws. And if we remove those markets, I got to thinking to myself, well, the economy could technically still produce all this stuff. We still have all the people who are doing all the creative work, but we'd lose a lot of jobs. So we'd still be making as much stuff, but people would be working less, and therefore they'd be getting less income. So that's when I thought, well, we still, we've got to, at some level of the economy, still have the resources to pay the people because we were paying them before and we're making exactly the same stuff, yet the jobs are gone, right? So that's when I started thinking about a basic income, and that was kind of the connection for me. And I had never thought about anything like a basic income until I had read this article. And this article doesn't talk about basic income, it just talks about eliminating copyright. Yeah, but you're eliminating a whole market and you're eliminating all these jobs. Yeah. So then I got to thinking, well, there's plenty of other markets and plenty of other jobs that are eliminated over time. And it doesn't mean we're producing less, and it doesn't mean we don't have the resources to provide for people. Yeah, so that was kind of the main connection for me. And I liked what everyone else said too. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I have a small thought,
kind
of related to Elizabeth's point. It's like a good example of this because actually so I'm in academia too, and people do the research for basically for free. They don't get paid for the paper; they get paid in reputation. And then it's all online, and the peer reviewers are also doing the work for free. They volunteer, so it's not really clear what the company is actually adding. They're only adding a little bit, but they still kind of keep it from the public and charge a lot of money for it. So it's one of these examples where it seems hard to justify that copyright, especially because a lot of the research is government funded in the first place. So you'd think it should be maybe publicly available, right? But it's not, and it's not clear what the service is it's not clear what the service is that's being provided, because although most of the labor is done for free, the reviewers and the scientists are doing it anyway. So I was just kind of agreeing with that. It's kind of a strange way that it works, where you still have to pay a lot for access to it.
Yeah, it seems hard to point out that they're sort of the basic set costs are okay, so someone, proofreads it and formats it and, puts it together.
Right.
But the amount that, Elsevier charges for
it's hard to imagine it
to
that
this one
expensive.
journal.
Right, exactly.
That's $1 gazillion.
Right.
That doesn't cover.
Right, it's hard to imagine that. It seems like it would make more sense to either just cover those fees with a very small fee or have it be government subsidized in some way. It's very strange, yeah. That's just one example, but it's kind of an example where it's already clear that the production would happen anyway.
Right.
Without the copyright really being there.
Yeah. Can we think of any examples where creative work wouldn't get done if you didn't have copyrights?
We've had one that we've been debating.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we've been a little worried. Like we were talking about like say major motion pictures that actually do cost a lot to like make the movie. And I was concerned that if you got rid of copyrights, you'd have a few very wealthy people kind of controlling the media content even more, because it's like they might fund the movies or something like that, but then they're controlling what content is out there in these sort of big budget films. That was one concern that I had.
This isn't the greatest example, but I funded a Kickstarter like 5 years ago, and for a movie, and they raised like $200,000 or something like that, but the movie was never made. The guy pocketed all of it.
Oh no! What? That's so bad. Yeah, I mean, you could do Kickstarters, but given like the amount of wealth inequality, I would just worry that like so much more money would go into whatever like the Koch brothers want, these like multi-billionaires want. Yeah.
Yes, I think it would be like less deals made. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Like,
can you say more? Yeah.
So let's say you have a young, like let's say record labels, for example.
Yeah.
You see someone from, let's give an example from Harlem.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He's just rapping in Harlem.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So a record label would say, hey, he has $0 in his pocket.
Right.
So he has no way to get it past Harlem.
Right.
But there's a belief from the record label that they can get past Harlem.
Right.
So if there's not that.
Right. Who's gonna help him launch?
Yeah,
right?
which would help the kid in Harlem. You know what I'm saying?
Right,
Like
yeah.
he could help himself, but
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Richard.
My cousin and his wife actually make money from music.
Oh, really?
They have their own band, if you call it the Moon and You. They call it, it's a bluegrass band thing. I don't know if you know. They actually put their music online. They make all their money from gigs and renting out music halls or something like that.
Like
I
live
see.
performances.
So the music download is free, but then people listen to the music and are like, hey, this is pretty good. I'm gonna book these guys. Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Do you know how they got started? Because like he was talking about like how do you kind of launch yourself in the beginning and get people, you know.
They did it by word of mouth, and they got their first. They got a gig at some bar or something.
Okay.
They actually had a previous band with like a number of people, but
Oh, I
that
see.
broke up. It's like Mountain or something. I don't remember what it is.
Gotcha. Were you gonna add?
Yeah,
So I want to say, so do you feel like if we just got rid of copyrights, would that like hinder creativity?
Right.
Because I could just steal anyone's stuff now.
Right.
Call it my own.
Well, you can't necessarily call it your own, right? Because people will still be able to say, hey, your stuff is the same as this other guy's stuff. Right?
Yeah.
then it's like to the point where it's like, shoot, you got to say that's yours.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Then it
If
becomes
more
a point,
people, if I can convince more people that this is my fault,
Oh, okay.
than someone
which is
else.
already actually a problem in the music.
Oh,
Right, because
interesting.
you'll sample something from
And
1972.
the
Yeah,
copyright is what
right.
protects the actual fact. Like, let's say we take a song to where, like, Juicy,
Right.
the Notorious B.I.G. song.
Right.
Now, without copyright, the bands Juicy that made Juicy for you, they still probably don't get acknowledged.
Right.
Biggie's
Yeah,
Biggie's song is bigger than
They're
Tupac.
bigger.
Right.
So it's just
Right.
like, who's to say this isn't mine?
Mm.
Well, we do have the technology now where you can post something and everyone knows, you can verify when it was posted online.
Mm.
So if you're the first creator, you can just, like, the way you can prevent that kind of thing from happening is sharing it, like, earlier.
Yeah.
And then people can prove that, hey, I put this
Right.
up earlier, like, this is, and then no one's going to be able to argue with
But
that.
maybe
Right?
people wouldn't have the incentive to actually like look into that.
And I think that would open up a can of worms.
Yeah.
Because now it's like, now it's a point of, now a creator is rushing to post it online.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Just because
Yeah.
someone can come and take it,
Right.
if they don't post it, to just to say it's there, so
Yeah.
now they're rushing their work. Not
So
making
this
it properly.
is kind of how it works in academia actually, because you don't have official like copyright protection in a monetized way.
Yeah.
But people are like kind of rushing to like put their name on the idea first.
Yeah, just
So
to
that
get it
like
out there.
it's acknowledged to be them because of what you said, because people
Yeah.
can go find that they like did it first
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
yeah, then academia gets this really like interesting thing where then you get like the atmosphere like, oh, like that grad student mentioned that really great idea, and I just went ahead and like wrote a paper, and I have more resources,
Right.
and so I wrote that paper faster.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to take like 17 classes and
Right.
like, teach 3 of them. Like
Yeah.
I had a sabbatical, and I'm like the grad student, and because that gets a lot harder to prove to be like, well, like the recovered file date on my laptop says that like I have this, and like where's the line? Of,
Yeah, it's hard.
like
right?
whose idea is it? Like how much work did you contribute? Like you know,
It
if
could be
you're like,
really
oh yeah, I
tricky,
had like a lunch talk and I was spitballing this idea.
Yeah, a lot of big conflicts happen over that. I imagine it's
Like
same
with-
with music.
Like with Darwin, I forget the guy's name. He had a malarial like infection or something like that, and then he actually sent his paper to Darwin, but Darwin had already started his work a few years, like 10 years before or something like that, and he wanted to publish it posthumously or posthumously. And so he like rushed to publish his paper.
Yeah.
But the guy was generous and he allowed Darwin to take credit for it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I guess in music too, or anything else, like if you overhear someone like singing something or doing something, and then you copy it, that could get dicey, right? Yeah. If it hasn't been like put out there yet.
Yeah, like and that fuzzy line because it's like ideas and it's sort of like oh like if you like heard that hook and you're like oh I'm kind of like messing with that like and you might not even be consciously thinking and you're just sort of like oh yeah I'm kind of thinking about that and you forget about it for a week and then you're like working on a song and you're like, yeah this cool hook.
Right. You might not even remember where you got it.
Yeah.
So I have a question, which is, so maybe this has already been answered, but for what reason would someone want to wait before sharing their music?
To improve it. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe the danger is that they shared the kind of rough cut of it with someone, and then that person stole the music.
Especially like now, like with social media, like you might post a 30-second clip online, but it's a rough clip and it's not the whole song.
So I have a question, which is, how does copyright offer a protection there that you wouldn't get without copyright?
What do you mean? It's like it's legal.
It's legal, so you can
Sue somebody.
You can sue someone.
You can sue someone for using it.
Yeah.
But it seems like since you already posted that rough cut, people know that you're the one who originally created it.
Right. Yeah, but I think it would be more like, let's say that you're not very famous, and like you post something, and then somebody like really famous goes in and posts and uses it. It's like if you didn't have a legal protection, theoretically people could look up the fact that some known person originally did it, but are they actually going to look that up?
Well, they don't. Right, exactly. Even with copyright, it happens all the time.
Right.
Yeah, but if the person does get famous, then you can be the guy who comes out and says, "I'm the one who created this thing that this famous person stole from me," and then people will pay attention.
But why will they? If they don't know who you are, why would they listen to you? Or how would you even get people to see that you're saying that?
Well, you can show that you posted it on YouTube.
You can show it, but to
you can do PR.
Yeah.
PR.
But who's
But
going to
then you have to deal with the fact that you know this guy who's accusing someone.
Yeah, exactly, right? If it even reaches the light of day.
But even though it's like verifiable online, you'd still like that would be a reputation.
People have to find out that you're even saying this, and they have to care. Like let's say I'm a no one. I don't have any YouTube. I have like one YouTube subscriber.
Well, hold on. Even without copyright, you can still sue someone for taking credit for your work.
You can.
That's not what copyright's about.
Wait, you can.
Yeah, sure.
That's how I didn't know that. That's a different legal designation.
Well, they're plagiarizing you. That's a separate
That's
thing.
copyright, isn't it?
No.
Oh,
It's
I didn't know
not-
that was different.
So what's the definition of copyright? Like what
Right.
is that specifically?
Right. So copyright says you're not allowed to use the work or perform it or kind of copy it in any way. It doesn't say you're not allowed to take credit for it. Like you're not allowed to take credit for it anyway.
Gotcha.
You're not allowed to take credit for other people's
So
work. That's kind of a separate
That's a
thing.
separate
Yeah.
thing. Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I thought they kind of went together.
No, like if like okay, like I'm gonna keep the music because this was about recording.
Yeah.
So if I have a record and I create a record, and someone uses my record in their song as a sample,
Right.
copyright protects me in the sense of that. So for ownership, and you're supposed to get royalties on behalf of being used. Now, if there's no copyright, I don't know, are the royalties, would they still be protected?
Right. So there would be no royalty protection, but they wouldn't be able to use that sample without giving you credit for it. They wouldn't be able to say like I made this.
So, but
That's still
monetization wise, it'd be okay. So it just, you need to be credited, but it's still, because copyright projects on monetization.
Right. There, without copyright, even if he steals your stuff, he still can't monetize it because he's not protected by copyright either. So there's no monetization.
Also, there's no monetization.
Right. Yeah.
Except,
right, exactly. Except maybe like the kind of thing Richard's talking about, where you're exactly.
So there's no okay, so
But he could be making money in a live performance with the sample and not giving anything to the other guy, I guess.
You can do that.
See, even now, like in that sense, like copyright is like every time even when you live before, every time you hear some music being played, publishing wise, someone's supposed to get paid.
Right.
But that doesn't happen 90% of the time. Like every time you hear a DJ play some music, he's supposed to pay whoever is the right holder of that music. That doesn't happen. Like, he's supposed to report his playlist every time he plays music. So even in that sense, even with copyright, this is still not being as like, because it's published. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's not being.
It's not really being enforced.
No, because every time you hear like radios, of course, that's why radios have the same set list. Because every time they play, they have to pay the copyright holder. So if they have too many, then too many payouts to manage. You know what I'm saying? So when it comes to like little DJs or every time you hear some music, publishing wise, someone's supposed to get paid.
No, that probably doesn't happen.
But that.
So maybe without copyright, you'll hear more of a variety of stuff on the radio.
You definitely would.
Yeah.
you definitely would, because without copyright, there would be no reason. Because like, when it comes to copyright, like labels, they usually own the master copy of the record.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So there's a difference between the master copy and the composition, and then the actual the composition is like the written part, and then there's actually the recording of the beat or the instrumental or the musicians. It's completely different, separate when it comes to publishing. So the label usually owns the hard master copy, which is the record in its entirety.
Yeah.
So that's why you hear that, because that's what the label owns.
Right.
Now the actual lyrics is whoever the publisher is, which is completely different. The label might be the publisher, but sometimes independent acts are their own publisher.
Right.
So they own, they own the composition. So when you get covers, that's how someone gets paid. Like, because they're getting paid off the composition. The label doesn't own it. Now the publisher owns that.
Interesting.
So they might get paid for the cover directly if they own their own.
If they own their own publishing, they'll get paid directly for the cover, like Sir Mix-a-Lot, Baby Got Back.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when you hear a recording, he owns his own publishing. So when you hear a recording of Baby Got Back, it might not be the master copy that the label owns. It could be a completely different recording, and they paid him, the publisher, for the composition.
Right.
I see.
We got paid when Nicki Minaj made the beat.
And the corner, like he gets paid. Like so, without that, I don't know. Like
all over.
so, without that, I don't know. Like it would be a lot of if no one's like with any. I think with a lot of industries, like.
Hello.
Hey.
Sorry for being late.
That's all right. Did you guys check out the article at all? Okay. I'm Alex.
My name is Krish. This is Mira.
All right, welcome to the group. Yeah, we're just talking about intellectual property right now. Are you guys familiar with basic income, or are you here for the intellectual property stuff?
Intellectual property, but
Okay, cool. So we're on the live stream. People will be able to hear you on the microphone. If you want people on the internet to see you, you can sit in these chairs. That's awesome. Support that, but it's okay. So we were talking about.
So how would creatives make a living?
Right. So
that's the question.
it would have to be different. And obviously, with gigging and that kind of stuff, like Richard suggested. But in this article, he talks about a few kind of alternative ways to fund creative work. And one of them is like we were talking about, like Kickstarter. He calls it the fund and release model. So you're like, oh, I'm this person who's good at making music or making art or something, and I want to do my next thing. Are you guys going to fund this? And then you can kind of like post online or find people to fund you. And then you fund it, so you still get funded and you still get paid. But then once it's released, it's free for everyone, so everyone can listen to your music, etc. Yeah, you can still make some money that way. But also, like I think you were saying earlier, Rob, most artists don't get paid at all for anything, because they're creating what they're creating, but like people like creative stuff is like really popularity based. So you have like these superstars, and then you have kind of everyone else. And we watched a video a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was like a month ago, by CGP Grey, and it was yeah, you've seen it. So it's called "Humans Need Not Apply," and it was talking about like robots taking over jobs and stuff. And one of the things he said when he was talking about creating creative stuff is that there can never be a poem and painting based economy, because it's all based on popularity. So it's not like you can have like, everyone's poems are read equally, or everyone, exactly. So really, we live in a world where artists, by and large, aren't getting paid for their work, even with copyrights.
Yeah.
And the ones you see who are getting paid, those are kind of the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we can't find ways to pay people for art without copyrights. So the gigging and kind of the fund and release models, and then there's like various ways to try to get people to support your career. Maybe you have like patrons, or you're teaching something, or maybe you're teaching music or you're teaching art, but then you're using that revenue to fund your creative stuff. Or if you had a basic income, that might just give you the freedom to create this really awesome stuff, but maybe it doesn't matter so much that you're not getting paid for it. Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess that comes back to the question asked earlier, which is like, would more or less art be happening if people weren't getting paid directly for it, or like at least there wasn't that like chance that you're going to be a big star, getting a lot of money? Like I think you're asking that question, right?
And
I don't know. Yeah.
I think this also reverts back to my ignorance on basic income.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So with basic income, is it a level playing field? Like, is it basically everyone gets the same amount?
Yeah.
And because I'm thinking from a standpoint of capitalism. So
Sure.
I'm thinking of a standpoint of, if you take a copyright away, you're taking away another form of monetization in the future, another way to bring in income to support my family. But if everyone's making the same, that's not really like you were saying, that's not a factor in my mind. So is that what makes, like, it's not just everyone gets a basic amount for living expenses and then they still do what they do to capital wise?
No, they still can do what they do.
Okay,
yeah.
capital wise.
But it's the amount of the basic income, and there's certainly plenty of debate about that. We've had debates about that in this room. In terms of what the appropriate amount is, some people say it should just be enough to cover people's basic needs.
Yeah.
But I think if you're kind of eliminating all these ways to make money, it makes more sense to pay people like whatever the economy can sustain. And that might be a lot. That might be well above, just people's basic needs. Like if we have the capacity to produce all this amazing stuff for people, why not give them the money to buy that stuff? The economy isn't going to produce stuff that people don't have the money to buy. So basic income kind of solves that problem.
So in other words, it might depend on like how much productive capacity you have in the economy,
Yeah.
How much can you afford to make for people, and then give them that much money
Gotcha. So if you're making more, you automatically get a set amount.
then get more money.
Like,
But
that's what I'm confused
As
about.
the economy is able to produce more for people, we increase the amount of the basic income, so everyone can benefit from that. From that capacity.
the amount is still the same for everybody.
Gotcha. So the amount is still the same. So would that create the exact same problem as in the music industry today, where you have the top earners and then you have the loafers, in a sense, like where there's a whole bunch of people making a lot of the productivity because that's truly what they want to do. Then you have the people that are just basically
Yeah.
Like, so it's like now the top 1%, but everyone gets paid the same. So now you got 10% doing, or 20% doing 80% of the work. Like, you know what I'm saying? Would that problem be?
So people aren't going to work unless they get paid enough to give them a reason to work. So you're still going to be earning money from, if you have a job, you're going to be earning money on top of the basic income.
Yeah.
So the basic income everyone receives, and then so you can think about it like the word basic, like it forms a base. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And then on top of that base, you can get more.
But yeah, it's like no one wants to collect trash and stuff. Like they have to get paid extra, so they get their basic income and then like some money to do that kind of thing.
Sure.
I think I saw this idea. It was on the Daily Show, right? With Trevor Noah.
Oh,
Yeah.
This
it was. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, the
about
moment.
basic income.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I definitely agree with it. Like, it would help the economy just because you automatically have spenders now.
Yeah.
I was confused. Is every single person in the country getting this basic income, or is it the people that like qualify it or need it, or
It's everybody.
Every school project.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill
And there's
Gates and the
Right. Yeah. Like Bill
Yeah.
Gates get this business too.
He is, yeah, and there's certainly debates about whether that's appropriate. Like some people feel like, well, he's rich, why should he get it? I kind of like, I'm hosting a basic income meetup, so you can imagine that I kind of follow that. Yeah. And yeah, I think in terms of how I kind of think about how the economy works, it actually doesn't make that much of a difference to give a little tiny bit of money to Bill Gates, because that actually doesn't affect the economy very much. But it takes resources to kind of figure out who deserves what, and then it also kind of creates some moral judgments. Like if you're getting the basic income, then that means you're poor,
Like
and then people can kind of like separate the groups and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then you're becoming one of those people like living in Section 8 houses.
Right.
Exactly, right.
You know
That's
that's
exactly
criminal. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
you know you're getting judged
Yeah.
rather than hey, we all got the same.
Yeah.
grade.
Yeah, even Bill Gates is getting it.
No problem.
Yeah.
But
Right.
then I feel like, but what I question about the system of being, like if you get a basic income and then people are still earning, doesn't that basic income become like zero? If everyone has the same thing, it doesn't become zero.
So
And then we're still earning.
So in terms of like relative differences between us, I think you're right. But in terms of just being able to like buy food, buy clothes, have a good quality of life, it's not zero, right? Because like it's still
Right,
money, you can still spend it.
Guys,
So like if you're homeless and now you have $2,000 a month, like that means something to you,
yeah.
even if everybody's going up. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like you're still at the bottom, but you're having a much better time.
Well, I mean,
Does that make sense? I don't know if that
yeah,
answers your
totally.
question. Did you? Yeah.
What's your name again?
Chris.
Chris. Okay. Yeah. What's up?
So, I think this is a really cool idea, but one of the things that this is new to me, I'm totally just like stepping in.
Yeah.
Just got here, I know. But one thing I am curious about is that like, isn't that so saying that there should be a basic income? Isn't that a similar issue to like raising minimum wage? And then like when you raise minimum wage, cheap things become a little bit more expensive, and then things become
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So Richard, go ahead, and then I'll have an answer too. But go ahead, Richard.
If you receive $1,000 from office, say, bread, and before you had zero, and you couldn't afford any, say, bread. Bread isn't going to be $1,000 a month. Even if it's $3, it's going to become $6 or something. You're still better off. You're still going to be able to actually buy bread.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I think
I
even
think I misunderstood your point.
if the money is becoming worth less, something is still better than nothing for the people who are poor. But I would say that basic income doesn't even necessarily have to lead to inflation. So inflation happens when the amount of spending on consumption outstrips the amount of stuff we're producing for consumers. So the idea with basic income is that it's activating unused productive capacity in the economy. So if we're spending more, but we're also producing more, then the prices stay the same because you still have the same amount of money going to each particular good. Does that make sense?
I see that what the goal is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Richard, yeah.
You can take it as an example of quantitative easing. There was $3 trillion added to the economy, but consumer prices pretty much went down or barely went up because it all went to the 1% or whatever. So the money didn't really get added to the economy.
Right. And yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So when you say it's more, who's more?
So of stuff in general. So an example I like to use is the Great Depression. So in the 1930s, because of technological advancements, et cetera, we had the capacity to produce a lot more stuff than we had in the 1920s. We had the capability, but people didn't have the money to buy the stuff. So we ended up with people losing their jobs and a lot of that capacity going unused and deflation and stuff like that. But if we'd had a basic income, then people would have been able to spend money to buy what the economy was already capable of producing. Does that make sense?
It's like saying that you couldn't produce a house because you didn't have any more inches, even though you definitely had all the stuff that you needed.
Right, or it's like you didn't produce a house because none of those homeless people could afford to buy the house, so you just didn't produce it. Whereas if they have money now you can build houses for them and they can buy the houses.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So now if we do the basic income that means we would have to defund everything else, like healthcare and no.
Depends on your vision for how you would pay for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. So a pet peeve of mine, and this is a bit controversial.
People up in here know he's got a pet peeve. No, you're not the first one.
No, don't worry about it.
I'm just trying to lodge.
No. So yeah.
It's totally understand. It's just funny. That's a good idea for the week. Like, oh, yeah.
They know what I'm gonna say. So it bothers me a little bit when people say that government spending is they're using taxpayer dollars, because I don't think it's actually useful to think of the money that the government spends as coming from taxpayers. So
they print it, right? Is that why?
Yeah, I mean maybe not literally print it, but they create.
Businesses too.
Right, they give money to businesses, and really the constraint on how much money the government can spend has a lot less to do with how much tax revenue they collect than it does with how much spending the economy can respond to productively without causing inflation and other bad things like that. So if there's room for the government to spend more, taking money away from Bill Gates isn't going to somehow magically create even more room to spend even more money. Like Bill Gates, for all intents and purposes, a lot of the money that Bill Gates has, it isn't really in the economy. He's just really rich, and he's holding on to this money.
He's bopping around finances.
Right. So taking money away from him, you're basically taking away money that wasn't really in the economy anyway.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to that, because like if you look at Bill Gates' net worth and anything like that, it's paper, right? It's not actually like it's all on paper. It's like via his value of the stock and things like that. It's not actually money in the economy.
Right. It's not like going to buy bananas. Like he's not buying, 1 million times as many bananas as everyone else and like using up all the bananas. He's just got all this money, which doesn't mean anything unless he spends it.
What do you think is key? Because I haven't been here, so
Yeah.
this might have been answered. You know what I mean? Last week, 2 weeks ago.
They haven't been here before either.
Yeah.
So I want to know, like, what are the key pros of basic income, and what are the key cons in your opinion?
Yeah, so it's gonna be really difficult for me on the con side.
So I want to hear the pros.
So I think in general we expect two different things from the labor market, and one is that we expect it to allocate the resource of labor efficiently, and then another is that we expect it to provide people income so they can buy what the economy is able to provide for them. But the problem is you can never have an efficient labor market if you're also trying to change it to get to force incomes to people. So if we're like creating jobs, or we have a minimum wage, or we have other things where we're like trying to get more money to people through the labor market, then that's not an efficient allocation of labor anymore. So basic income, what it does is it says people need incomes. We all know that people need incomes. And the economy needs labor in order to produce stuff. It needs some amount of labor, but there's no law of economics that says that amount of labor corresponds to the amount of wages that's optimal for people's incomes or something like that. So if you separate these two concerns, if you say like, well, the labor market is only about incentivizing as much labor as the economy needs in order to produce stuff, and we consider providing people with enough incomes as a separate thing, then you can have a really efficient economy. You can have a really efficient labor market, and we're not like making people do unnecessary work anymore. And people get to benefit from what the economy is able to produce.
Now, in a basic income system, now I'm trying to like think how it happened, like because this is actually something that's being like this is something that is actually being fought for. Right?
Yeah. So
like, this isn't something like a dream or something.
Well, it's also that. But there's one of the presidential candidates who's running in 2020. His name is Andrew Yang, and he's actually running on a basic income platform.
Gotcha.
I don't think the way he's doing it is correct, because he's trying to tax people and stuff like that, which I don't think is necessary. But it's becoming more part of the discussion.
Gotcha. So
go ahead, Sherrill. Yeah.
So back to my original point though, like let's make an example. Like, all right, so the government, we're complaining about Boston public schools, like okay, like what if they like defund lots of public schools? Because they're like, well, screw you, we're giving you a check. We have to give you a check every month. You know, so like pay for your own kids' education. Y'all take care of it, put them in private school or something. But it's like, so now because we have to pay everyone every month, we kind of got to take from this, how much we're giving to schools, how much we're giving to parks and, you know, recreation, or, you know, things like that. Like, I'm just, where is, like, if we're only giving one place, some place is going to come out.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like this is kind of the option that I tend to jump to when it comes to restructuring where money is funded and how it's earmarked, is diverting a lot of the funds that we put into the military to other areas, because there's a lot of money there. And I feel like that could be one of the options if this were to be a structure that worked.
Right.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
just want to make a distinction because there's like Alex has a kind of unconventional way of thinking about things. So, so there's kind of like two different questions. One is like, are there untapped resources? Like resources we're not really even taking advantage of. And then the other question is like, once you reach a constraint, like you're at a resource limit, you know, how do you allocate? Like, how do you decide? And Alex tends to think that we have a lot of untapped resources, so he's not even at the point of trying to make those trade-offs.
Right, so it's like, it's not about like, there's enough.
Right.
You're saying someone's holding up. Someone's got them.
So I think Steve Jobs actually mentioned this about when it comes to schooling, how if everyone received a stipend, it would make schooling more competitive, which would make it more innovative, which would provide options. Whereas if you had gave every person a stipend to pick a school, it would create more innovation in school.
So
you mentioned that.
I think that's a tricky one. If you look at the price of colleges, you know, like people are pretty much willing to pay whatever it takes to get their kid into the best school and whatever. And so you're giving money that's or loans that's specifically designated to go towards higher education. And then what that does is that creates an incentive for the colleges to compete on dimensions other than price. So they're like, we're going to raise our tuition, but we're going to build this, you know, big new student facility or something like that. So you get these kind of distortions. And I'm worried that if you give people money and it's specifically for school, then school will kind of compensate by getting more expensive. And you see that in like healthcare too.
But
like
everyone gets the same amount. Like I'm talking about public schools. I'm talking about from K to 12. I'm not talking about college. Like I'm talking about from K to 12. And everyone gets the same amount. There's no like you don't get more expensive. It's just about, hey, we're trying to get more students.
They would at least compete on dimensions
I think you're
of some kind.
that could
So you know what I'm saying? Like it's not about like because you need more because you want more income when it comes to how many students you can actually house and make a great environment, because everyone's gonna be able to pick their option rather than just, hey, we're gonna throw this kid. It's when I was in high school, it's 40 kids in the classroom. 40 kids in one class.
But you were all really well behaved, so it was fine.
Yeah. How can you learn that way? How can you, and another thing I fear about the basic income thing is if you give a young black man the same amount as a young white man, I don't know in the environment, I don't know if it's the same outcome. Do you get what I'm saying? Just about like so many things will have to improve in our communities before you can give everyone a basic income. Do you get what I'm saying?
I mean, like it's not going to solve every problem.
Because the minute Auntie Jackie get that, she going down to Jimmy. You get what I'm saying? She going down to Jimmy and Dudley. You get what I'm saying? And who knows if she gonna make it out? If she got a super amount of income every year. You get what I'm saying? Because she already has addictions. She has vices that are bad for her. And if she had more, she'd probably already be dead. Right. Do you get what I'm saying? So I don't know. In certain community, it would be like multiplying negativity for some people. Do you understand what I'm saying? For all.
What do you think, Sherrill?
I feel like just because Auntie whatever got a problem, that don't mean this person shouldn't eat tonight. You know what I'm saying? Like, people are always gonna have vices. People are always gonna want to do bad things. There's always gonna be bad. What people consider bad, or you know what's not productive. But like, what about those people that like, nah, I just kind of want to make it. Like, I just want to feed my kids. I just want. There's good people out there. So it's like saying, I don't know, like. I don't know, you know what I'm saying? We can't not take care of everyone just because. Yeah, Elizabeth.
Okay. So I agree. I think that the ways in which it's really easy to think about, like, oh, you know, these like drug addicted teenagers or whatever, and like, oh, whether or not we get basic income to teenagers is separate. But but like, you know, college students, whatever, like, oh, it's so terrible, but we don't look at like bankers, and we're not like, oh man, those like middle-aged white dudes with their coke problems. Because you know they do so much coke. So like we certainly can, you know, talk about ways to, you know, prevent people from doing things we think are bad. But I think you're right that the good of a basic income for people in general outweighs that, and I worry about the ways in which it's easy to pick and choose and be like, oh well, those people don't deserve it. But I do take. I'm not sure if that's the point that you were exactly trying to make, but I do think that the race gap isn't going to be solved. Like it's like there's still generational wealth, there's still like discrimination in hiring practices, and so definitely like basic income is not going to solve like all of the general generational wealth problem. Like there's definitely other work that needs to be done to achieve parity.
Do you think it would help?
I think it would help. Yeah, I think that it, like entrepreneurship is something that is like primarily like wealthy white dudes. They're like, I can fail and I have trust fund at home. And so I think it allows for a lot of people to try out things and gives people more of a cushion to fall back on if they fail. So I think it can be really helpful. I think it can help to decrease the gap, but I don't think there's any way that would totally close the gap.
Go ahead, Richard.
In Give Directly's basic income program in Kenya, people actually cut back on their vices because they're actually able to see how their lives could improve in the future because they use their drugs or whatever to compensate for their lack of a sense of control. And people, if their basic income, many of them actually start up their own businesses and like they could. I remember hearing about this. There's a guy who created his own, I always say it, like solar panel, telephone charging business or something like that. So he had his own solar panel, and he had people. He charged people to charge their cell phones.
Yeah.
Or they buy cattle or goats or whatever, so they can pay dowries for their daughters or something.
Yeah. So
another question. Well, like kind of to what you were thinking, like I understand what you're saying, but like probably like you know if you give like a 10-year-old kid $2,000, he's probably gonna buy like Xbox, you know, whatever. Like so is it like $2,000? Okay, it's like just the head of the household get a check every month, or does every single person in that house gets a check every month? You know,
That's an interesting question.
that's a number.
go ahead, Richard.
With the Southern Band of Cherokees, they actually have a basic income every month because of their they have their own casino.
Yeah.
And so there was actually a study that started before their casino opened up and about the outcomes of children, and it's drastically different from the children from before and after because they're not hungry and they don't have as many behavioral issues and.
So were they giving the basic income to the children, or like what age did they have to be to get it? It's okay if you don't know.
They actually receive this like lump sum when they're after they graduate from high school, only when they graduate.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so
go ahead, Chris.
there's like 3 things that are on my mind.
Yeah. All right.
One, before I forget, this intellectual property stuff, I actually would love to learn more about it.
Yeah.
At
we
some
kinda
point
got
we
off
should
on that
talk
one.
about that. The other thing is, there's 2 actual questions I have.
Yeah.
One, I could describe it as like commissions, and then another thing I would describe it as something that's probably a little more like touchy. So right now, I want to ask, so if you're saying that everyone's going to have a basic income, and then they will work to make more on top of that? Or is
It's more that the labor market is a market. So if it needs to incentivize people to work, it will pay them enough to get them to work. If your basic income is so high that nobody's working at all and nothing's getting produced, then you're doing basic income wrong. So the optimal amount of basic income is the level that would get the economy to kind of reach its full potential.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this kind of like sounds like so I worked at Sears for about a year, and
Okay.
you're on commission at Sears, and you have a base salary, and then you like have like a commission that you can make on like products.
Yeah.
So it sounds like everyone would have the base salary, right? That's like the basic income, and then if you do more, you make a little bit more. Is that the right idea?
I think that's the right idea, except that the base salary is not for doing anything; it's just for being a person. Yeah.
And the moral sense or the norms might be different. Like, you know, at Sears, it's clearly that you're supposed to be trying to make these sales.
Yeah.
But you can imagine culture being different, where some people would choose to do like art or something else, and it's not like they're supposed to be making more money necessarily, but maybe some people would spend more time with their kids or something else. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Could be.
I'll ask a question. Yeah, that's a question.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good question.
Oh, cool. Aaron the Great.
With basic income, how would immigration be applied or affected? So, hey, Aaron, that's a great question. We had an entire discussion on immigration a few weeks ago. Yeah, and I would encourage you to check out that video. But in essence, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about basic income, they're worried, okay, now everyone's going to want to immigrate to this country and collect the basic income, and that's not sustainable or something like that. I tend to think not. I tend to think that if you have a basic income and you have open borders, then maybe that changes what the level of basic income is that you can afford based on the amount of immigration or something like that. But there's nothing inherent in basic income that says you can't have immigration. Or, you know, maybe it might even be cheaper to give people the basic income, even if they're not citizens of this country. Maybe the United States pays for basic income for everyone in the world. Like that could be something that could potentially work. I'm looking up here, but really you're looking at me from over here. So hi.
Yeah, that's a big topic.
But we had a whole discussion about it, and there's plenty to kind of like question and poke at in what I just said. So that's not the whole story. Yeah.
So another sort of thing that I'm curious about, okay, and I know this word is going to be a little intense.
Uh-oh. You weren't here for the part where I warned us about words not to use. Let's see if it's one of them.
Are there?
No, whatever. Go ahead.
So basically, how is this different from socialism?
Yeah.
That wasn't one of the words.
Wasn't one of the words. Maybe it should have been. I don't know. But yeah, so socialism is about labor. Socialism is about kind of having centralized control of labor. So this is kind of orthogonal to that. This is giving people money to buy what's produced by the economy, and labor is more of a resource that goes into the economy. So we can argue about which things that should be produced by private firms in a private market, and for which products it makes more sense to put in control of the government for production. Like maybe for some things it's more efficient for the government to do it, like more efficient for the government to build roads and other infrastructure and that kind of thing. So maybe that's kind of like the socialism end of the spectrum. And then maybe it's more efficient for private industry to produce other kinds of goods for people. And that's more of like the capitalism end of the spectrum. But basic income is just whoever's producing what, you're giving people the money to buy it. So it's kind of compatible with both. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I see what you're saying, but I'm just like, how do I like conceptualize that? How do I actually like,
I think that it
like
doesn't.
when you have like a story problem in math and you're like, let's plug in some numbers and like give you an example. So
I think the way to kind of conceptualize it is that the economy has a certain capacity to produce stuff for people. And some people are getting money from wages, but there's some stuff that's going unproduced because people don't have the money to buy it. Now you can imagine if prices are just adjusting all over the place, maybe, all the prices of everything goes way down until people can buy everything. But that's not how the currency works. Like in order for money to work properly, it has to have a stable value. It has to be kind of like a standard stable unit of value over time. So what ends up happening is that as we use less labor, if we assume an efficient labor market, as we use less labor, there's less money going to consumers, so we actually produce less. So basic income can compensate for that. We compensate for that in other ways by kind of distorting the labor market and forcing money to people and making up jobs and that kind of thing.
Private credit.
And private credit. So making it easier for people to borrow money in the private financial sector, easier for businesses to borrow money and hire people, like that kind of stuff. But basic income is kind of a simpler, more stable way to achieve some of the same goals.
It doesn't quite fit into like a common political label, I think, is maybe part of what you're struggling with.
I get along with people like all across the political spectrum because there's no one I agree with. So I have to learn to get along with people who disagree with me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any friends. Yeah.
It's like reciprocation is kind of everybody.
Go ahead, Shirley.
All right, so we're paying people enough to like not be hungry or not be homeless, or you know what I'm saying? So because I feel like I'm with the idea, but I feel like if you give someone their living wage, like let's say we just told them 30,000,
Sure.
what's the incentive to work? So like, are we gonna like give them just enough where it's like, you kind of still have to work,
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing?
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
The question of how much you're capable is sort of a separate question. But I think that I wanted to see in response to like, do we think that people aren't going to work if we give them like 30,000? Like, there are people now who make 30,000 who are like, but I really want like that promotion, or I want to move to a different job. Like, there are a lot of people, like, I don't see a lot of people being like, I have enough money to live on, I'm just gonna chill. Like, some people do, but like, doctors aren't like, I could go and be like a family physician and make 30,000 and like that's. I mean, some doctors are, but a lot of people in med school are like, I want to be like a neurosurgeon or like whatever that makes like $100,000, and people put a lot of like labor and time into that. And so I think that there would still be a lot of people who would be like, well, I make enough to like be comfortable, but like I would really like to be able to renovate my kitchen. I would really like that nicer car. I would really like to be able to like vacation to Cancun every summer. And that people, I think a lot of people will still want to do that extra work. And not everyone will, but that's okay.
But I also think if everyone made 30,000, a ticket to move that's honestly
That's
that's
a
private company.
Not if we didn't have copyrights. So it depends, right? And I don't think there's a right answer to this question, and I don't know that we can necessarily know ahead of time in terms of like how much the basic income should be. I think Elizabeth is right that if the economy needs people to work, it will pay people to work. It might have to pay them more. In some cases, if you're receiving a basic income, if everybody's receiving a basic income, some salaries might go down because there are a lot of people who say like, I'd love to be a teacher, I just can't afford the salary. But now more people can afford to be a teacher. Now there's more competition to be a teacher, so teacher wages go down. Like so some wages might go down and some wages might go up under basic income. But in terms of limiting it to people's basic needs or food or something like that, I don't know if that's particularly a useful way to think about it, because it's potentially possible that the economy could provide more without causing $45 movie ticket prices or something like that.
Yeah.
If your basic income gets so high that it's starting to cause inflation of prices and stuff like that, then your basic income is probably too high. But that's what you look at. You say like, well, let's keep increasing the amount. And then when we get to a level where increasing it further is going to start causing inflation or not going to provide any additional benefit, then that's the optimal amount.
Does everyone know what inflation? He just means prices.
Prices go down. Yeah. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
So that's kind of related to your question, because
I'm just I get ambitious people. They're out there, but there's more people that are not in those like, I'm a lawyer and I want to be the best. There's more people that are just like, well, I work at Burger King before this, and now I get a free 30,000. So why would I, you know what I'm saying?
Right. So if
we just pay you enough where it's like you're not starving, but you still need to earn money for rent.
Part
So
of
they
what
think
it,
the
So part of this will depend on like how much do we actually need those people's labor, right? So if we really need those people's labor for like prices not to go up, then we wouldn't be able to afford to give that much basic income. But if it's actually the case that we're kind of like resisting automation at Burger King now, anyway, like just because we want to give people those incomes, then maybe like we just have machines at Burger King and we don't actually need those people to work there in the first place. So it's also about not wasting people's time, but that kind of depends on the economy and how much it needs labor. Does that kind of
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
So I think part of what that idea stems out of is actually an answer would be like my 30,000 is my new normal. If my normal was 0 and now my new normal is 30,000, eventually I'm gonna say to myself, well, 30,000 is nice, but my friend's also got 30,000, and then he's doing this other thing. And I wanna it's like because everyone's I remember when I was hanging out with some friends in college and they're like, yeah, I got this like really cool cell phone. I'm like, all right, whatever. And then, but like other people are like, oh my god, cell phones. Like so everyone has a little thing that they're. Even I have things that I want better of or more of or something like that. And like I told people initially, like, this is my number. Like once I reach this number, I'll be fine. And like I'll go into this job and I'll get this number. And then eventually I start hanging out with like people that are making that number.
And then you're like,
I don't want to be a little bit better. And so it's like that push to be a little bit above the new normal, I think would be the motivation. Because I agree that like it's easy to say like you don't need to try if you're already getting this, but it's like you're hanging out with you and your friends. Everyone has a little bit of like that's pride, that's ego, and that's actually part of like motivation.
So, but wouldn't that also be? I think what Sherelle was saying, like, okay, so you see how you have that where it's like I'm gonna work here and I'm gonna do this to get to this number, and then you surround yourself with different people to elevate yourself.
Yeah,
that's ambitious. That's ambition. You get what I'm saying? So someone, I'm talking about people that don't have that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what
I think Sherelle is right that there are people who just don't have that. If given the chance, they're just going to be a blob, right? They're just going to like sit back.
I agree. I like the idea.
Yeah.
I just don't want people to be lazy once they get the basic income.
So
like, let's get you enough to where you're not starving, but you still gotta pay rent.
So here's a question: why not? Why don't you want people to be lazy?
Why do I want people to be lazy?
So if I'm the employer, or if I'm just someone living in the economy, who do I want working at the jobs? Do I want the people who are ambitious, who really like the jobs and are really into it? Or do I want them competing with people who would otherwise be blobs? No, I want the people who want to be blobs. I want them to go be blobs, so other people can like do the real stuff. You know what I mean? So I mean, there's that aspect to it too. But I think like Bethany said, what you said was right, that if we really do need the blob people to be working in the economy, then we're not going to set the basic income so high that they would stay home. So you're right about that too. Yeah. So is everybody ready to get back to intellectual property? Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, like the main idea here is basic income. This is a basic income meetup group,
Right.
and we kind of have a different topic each week to like keep it interesting. But if there are people who are new who like want to talk about like the basic stuff, then that's great too.
No, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool.
That's fine.
Just a quick thing.
Yeah,
I do
go
want
ahead,
to get
Chris.
into this.
Yeah.
But so similar to what I was saying earlier, it's
Yeah.
like your base income, and then if you earn more, you earn more on top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is actually what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not like everyone just has the same income, no matter what you're doing.
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
Because that's what socialism is.
Yeah.
I think so.
Sort of,
So
yeah.
I mean, I'm just
Like
trying
maybe
to
kind of,
differentiate.
yeah,
Like, I just
yeah.
can't-
So maybe that,
Yeah.
maybe that helps address your question about socialism, and it doesn't imply like any taxation or anything like that either. So I want to write kind of 4 key points on the board about intellectual property.
Okay.
Can I write some stuff on the board?
Sure. I
Okay.
thought you said.
I want to have these points written on the board, and I don't want to have to do any work because I'm a blob.
Also, Kathy's handwriting is better.
That is the real reason.
Yeah. So point number 1 is ensuring that that we get the most creative output from people. Yep. And then the second one is maximizing everybody's access to what gets created.
My spelling always goes when I'm writing a report. It's
Yeah.
So maximizing people's access to what gets created. And then the third one is ensuring people get paid what they deserve for what they created.
I'm gonna put that in quotes because it's one of those things.
Yeah. What they deserve.
I don't mean, I just mean it's a controversial kind of interesting
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
Whatever that is, yeah.
And then the fourth one is preventing powerful interests from controlling the works that we have access to. So you guys can kind of see what I'm getting at here. These are like a lot of the kind of core concerns and questions that came up in the first part of our discussion. And I think it's important to just kind of have these in our consciousness as we continue the discussion. Because some of these things are kind of at odds with each other, and some of them, you know, like, I don't know. I think we care about all of these things, and what helps us achieve these things might be different depending on which point we're talking about.
So these 4 points are under, just clarification, what are these 4 points under?
They're all things we want that are related to creative work in the economy.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Does anyone have any like any big thing to add to that list that they feel like they want us to have in our minds during the conversation? All right. So that's that, and that's there. So I'm gonna start talking a bit, and people raise your hands if you have any thoughts. Does anyone have any thoughts about these 4 points? Like, are they all things that we want?
So
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Cool.
You're saying that these are 4 things that intellectual property, that the notion of intellectual property is supposed to ensure, or that law surrounding intellectual property should achieve these 4 outcomes.
I'm not saying either of those things.
Okay.
I'm saying there are 4 outcomes that we want. And as we talk about intellectual property, we can think about whether having intellectual property supports these outcomes, or in what form of intellectual property, or in what way it supports the outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. But it's broader than that. It's more about the creative output of the economy and what kind of outcomes we want related to that.
And on just a little bit of the vocabulary, what determines creative? Like when my son was really young, he did some really creative things, but I would have preferred less output. Particularly when it came to repairing glass windows. It used to be there before the soccer ball took its place.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I guess for the purposes of this, we would say desirable creative output that people are excited about consuming, and not broken windows. But more generally, I would say, like, remember the CGP Grey video when he's talking about like a poem and painting based economy. You know, like the stuff that we produce that's kind of popularity based and artistic and that kind of stuff. But it could be also inventions and patents. So forget about everything.
And when you say something like what they deserve, I remember having a conversation with what I'll call a little old lady.
Yeah.
And we got to talking about Brad Pitt. And
Okay.
and it was like what Brad Pitt's salary, and I said, well, then who should determine Brad Pitt's salary if he's making too much use? And she's like, we, the people. And then I was like, well, how much should Brad Pitt make for a movie? I don't know, $100,000.
Okay.
And so she had everything all worked out. And I don't think she cleared with Brad Pitt, but anyway, so she had this idea of what he deserved. So, like, how do you define pay what they deserve?
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky one, and I think that's why Bethany instinctively put it in quotes. Yeah.
It's controversial, right?
Yeah. Go ahead. Richard first. Yeah.
It's said that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, that the creative achievements and technology and whatnot that exist today wouldn't exist without someone inventing the wheel 20,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or whatever it was, or the first person who brought that split trees fire from that lightning bolt that split the tree over to the den and lit some tinder on fire or whatever, or the person who more recently, like
Well, I think I get what you're saying, which is that everything we're making is based on kind of what came before. Yeah.
To build on that, do you think intellectual property in the legal sense dampens the collaboration that is needed for creativity?
Yeah.
Related to innovation? Do you think it dampens that, like legally,
Right.
intellectual property as it stands today? Do you think it dampens that?
Yeah, Richard.
Well, I posted an article about how the patents for the Da Vinci remote
Surgical device.
yes ran out. So all these new surgical devices that are significantly cheaper are coming onto the market recently. Like Google having a cloud-based one that everyone's surgeries, all the different surgeries data is compiled and that they improve the performance that way.
Yeah. And in software, you talk about in software in particular, there's a lot of dampening of interaction because you want it to move really quickly. I don't know if you want to speak to that. But.
Yeah, and I think it's true in general. When you have open source software, there's a lot more kind of free collaboration and people building on each other and stuff like that. But I think generally speaking, intellectual property, both patents and copyrights, they do to some degree inhibit collaboration, just like you were saying, Rob. And in terms of I want to build something or I want to create something that's based on Mickey Mouse, you can't do that yet. It's been 100 years or whatever, but yeah.
You can create something based on Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, but legally, I mean, it's it's restricted.
Right. 50 Shades of Grey started as Twilight fanfiction.
Right.
Now you basically just use the basis of what inspired you, but you can't just you can't take Mickey Mouse and say Mickey Mouse, and that isn't really
right.
When that's copyright. I'm talking about patents and things like that when it comes to creative collaboration with copyright and trademarks. It's you can't just take what someone else is branded and named. You know what I'm saying? But you can't be inspired by it. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do know what you're saying, and you're absolutely right. And even in software, you're allowed to rewrite the same code with the same functionality as long as you kind of use your own words. So you're writing it again, even though it does the same thing, and that's kind of a way of getting around the copyright restriction. But it's extra work that you have to do, and it ends up creating a lot of redundant work. And sometimes it's not worth it, and there's stuff that doesn't get done because people weren't able to incorporate other people's code in their code and stuff like that. I think software is probably a better example than Mickey Mouse.
That concept is also true in other areas of research and development. It's not unique.
Yeah, certainly scientific research, pharmaceutical research, that kind of stuff.
If you can prove that you did it, I forget the expression, white lab, or in other words, you made no use of any previous patented technology in developing a particular technology, then you can do that, and be not subject to violations for maybe patent or trade.
Which sounds a little bit absurd on the face of it if we're thinking about creativity as this process where we're standing on the shoulders of giants and building on each other's work, and then you're allowed to do it as long as you're not building on somebody's work. I feel like it really slows us down. Yeah. Heading out, Shireen?
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
With everyone.
Yeah, come back next week.
Come back.
Yeah, Richard.
There's actually AI that can code for you now that you tell it what you want it to do, and then it creates the basic, might be horribly coded for it, but it gives you the idea of what you need to do to create that thing that you want to do.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think intellectual property, patents in particular, but also copyrights in some contexts, they do inhibit creative collaboration. But the fact that you have a promise of this kind of exclusive monopoly, it creates an incentive to to do that kind of work, and creates a monetary incentive. So the question is, what's the balance? Is there a balance that should be achieved between kind of the incentives that intellectual properties create to get creators to create stuff, and the kind of inhibition of collaboration that happens as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the current patent laws, copyright laws, all IP laws,
Yeah.
the goal is to encourage capitalistic interests. So encouraging people to create, so their ideas are protected for a certain number of years, but not so long that it just goes on in perpetuity and prevents other people from also getting in on that later on.
Yeah.
So I think that some people could argue that the way that they're currently set right now has achieved that balance. Not that I'm saying that's what it is, but yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely, and I didn't want to be the one to say that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying, and I don't, because I might be naive in the sense that this is the system that I'm accustomed to and I understand and I know when I was taught. So it's a system that I don't feel, I feel like it's a pretty okay system when it comes to copyright and trademark and intellectual property, and how, like, if you create something, you should be able to benefit from it for years to come. I believe in that. I think that's reasonable, and I think this system, I don't see like the anti-copyright, because like back to what we were saying earlier when it comes to different streams of income that you would use without copyright, but copyright is just a bonus on top of that. You know what I'm saying? Like all those streams are still there. Like you can still own your copyright plus gigging. You know what I'm saying? But gigging is just it's like you being an employee, whereas copyright is you having ownership. So without copyright, you're not an owner.
Yeah. So I think this kind of speaks to questions 1 and 3. Like at first we were talking about how to get the most creative output from people, like how do you incentivize that? And then 3 is kind of like ensuring that people kind of get paid, they get rewarded for the work that they've done.
Yeah.
So I think there's kind of both of those aspects to this. Elizabeth, do you?
I was going to say that it sort of operates or is fundamentally from the different aspects. It's one thing to be like, oh, well, you can use it, like, all right, maybe you're only getting like a 12%, but like you're getting some sort of bonus on top of gigging. But then when they get into like patents and stuff, then you get like pharmaceutical drugs, where it's like, okay, so then unless the government subsidizes it, no one can afford like cancer meds, like just because like the big pharmaceutical companies, oh well, we need to pay for like all the R&D like that failed, like and so we are charging the super high prices, and that feels like a less ethically tenable, like, oh well, we should be allowed to charge like $300 for an EpiPen, like because like we deserve it. Well, but people are gonna die.
And wouldn't that cause others to skip steps because of regulation? Would it be opposed because intellectual property isn't there?
I'm not sure I understand.
I think you could still have FDA approval needed and stuff like that.
And things
That's
like
a
so.
separate process.
Gotcha. So that's completely separate.
And that's part
like
of
on an EpiPen.
Right.
Right.
I think
You still need FDA approval.
Yeah. And that's part of what makes what makes patents so important for pharmaceutical research is that a lot of times you file your patent and then you can't really sell your product until your patent's almost already expired anyway. So I'm not saying that there aren't problems with it. In fact, I would say we'd probably be better off without the patents and figuring out another way to fund the research. But that's why it's a big thing in pharmaceutical research and chemical research as well. It's how they make their money. These industries.
Theoretically, you could still have more like government-funded research into these things, and they wouldn't have to patent them. Like theoretically, that's available even within the current system.
Yeah, I mean,
we
like,
just don't invest in that.
In order to develop these drugs and these technologies, you need money to do that, and that money can be the promise of future patent or future profits from the patent that you ultimately end up getting, or it can be you're funded because you're good researchers and the government's funding you or that kind of thing.
There already is some of that, or like the cancer institutes and stuff, but I think it's just maybe not. I don't know what percentage of it is.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So I finally got my notes on Bullshit Jobs, the book.
Okay.
And he makes this one point in the book, and I recall I was in this panel. This was like this entrepreneur panel, Shark Tank kind of thing. Everything is Shark Tank, you know.
Yeah.
Okay? And this woman sits down, and she's kind of like probably about my age, which means just old, and and worried about getting laid off and all that kind of stuff, and just before you retire, whatever, right? Someone that kind of, and I can imagine somebody, and she was in financial industry, and there are a lot of people in the financial industry whose jobs are very seriously at risk because fintech is going to wipe those jobs out unless there's some sort of intervention. And she sits down and she says to me, not exactly these words, but this whole panel is really just kind of bullshit. They're just, all these folks are spending all kinds of crazy money on all these crazy ideas, and none of them are going to work. And it's just like a total waste, and people's egos and everything else. And I wanted to say to them, why don't you just shorten the whole program here by just telling the 5 ideas that entrepreneurs can go out and execute, and they're going to make successful companies and employ lots of people, and everybody else can go home. And I didn't say that. But there is an element, and it does come up, a little bit in drug research and all that sort of thing, which is a lot of these, things that we see, you see them after the fact, but actually predicting what's going to work, what's not going to work. I mean, I've seen AIs being used now to predict predicting the molecules, like developing a drug, right? It's a drug molecule.
Right.
But using AI to sort of predict molecules, because it's a lot cheaper to have the AI predict molecules than have human beings spend an awful lot of PhD time trying to sort of come up with the next drug. And so I guess my point is, though, is a lot of these things are we're in an area where it can be very expensive to make a very small incremental progress, and it's sort of like how in a society do you decide whether or not you make those investments. And IP is all figures into this because EpiPens, well, what should.
But couldn't you almost do a calculus, like a cost calculus of whether it's cheaper to invest in the research on the government end and then not have to subsidize the really expensive drugs through health insurance versus the current model? I don't know if it's easy.
So here's my thought on that.
Yeah.
Is that in a way that to me also seems like doesn't make sense, because now it's the ownership of. The challenge is that is the government good at deciding where to apply the research resources and development? And that's, now you get back to the woman sitting next to me in the room there, which is, can you tell which
But couldn't
investments
you
you're gonna
just have one step right below that's almost the same as what's currently happening? So for academic grants, it's really people in the field that decide, even though the money is coming from the government. So you could have the same. You could have more.
It's interesting that you
universities.
mentioned grants, because that's the specific example in bullshit jobs, where a bullshit job is applying for grants, because all these grants, they're just wasting so much money because they're developing hundreds and hundreds or thousands of grant proposals, and only 1% of them are going to get funded, and so the 99% of the people employed in developing the grants that don't get funded, those are the bullshit jobs from the author's perspective. And now I find, now he's sitting next to me, because I'm going to say to him, save us all the time and money, just tell us what the 1% are that are going to get approved.
Right.
Without having,
Right.
see,
And he's not
that's
gonna
the
be able to
problem.
do
You
that.
don't
Yeah.
have the answer to what the 99% are,
So you're-
even though the numbers can be really extraordinary in the sense of the failures, 99 failures for
Yeah.
every one.
But you spend those resources to be able to find that 1% that is going to work.
1% equals chicken.
And that's, I guess, is the point, is that, maybe there is a better way, but right now, kind of the state of the art is exactly what you said. You spend the 100 to get only 1 out of
Right.
99.
There
go ahead.
actually is a proposal for reforming the grant system, and that you give some money out to everyone, because everyone who's qualified for it with the proper level of education or whatever, so that they can do their proposal and see how it works. Because if one person succeeds, then they in the current system, then they can keep getting more and more grants, and they get more access to money, larger grants, and so they can continue on, while someone who failed once, their career effectively ended, and so they can't do anything more.
So it's kind of an algorithm for deciding how to allocate funds almost.
When it works, you continue.
Yeah, when it works, you
When
continue.
it doesn't,
So
you stop.
So-
That's
yeah,
But Richard's point is that like, I think, if my understanding is that essentially the idea is that you could essentially have like a 1 out of 100 in every person. And so you would be like, oh, we're gonna fund people even after their failures because they might still have like a really great idea instead of being like, oh, we're
It's
gonna.
like the Buckminster Fuller quote, that one person out of 10,000 can, his idea can pay for the other 10,000 or whatever.
yeah. I think that's right. I don't think you necessarily need kind of the patent protection and private markets deciding it in order to get the same kind of effect. Like you could have the government funding everyone and maybe giving more funds to the researchers who have demonstrated, like that they're coming up with good stuff. Even though any particular idea they come up with might still be 1 in 100 or something like that, you're still kind of funding the process, the overall process. Does that make sense, Martin?
Yes, but I don't know that we've developed a better mousetrap like this.
So I guess I want to get back to people getting paid what they deserve, because I had a comment on that, which is that I don't think in terms of that. So ultimately what I think about is how to make the world, how to structure our society in such a way that everyone is as well off as possible. How do we benefit people the most? So I don't know if we benefit people the most by, having this kind of intellectual property system of people getting paid for their creative works necessarily after they've created them. I do think that if we focus on number one and get kind of the most creative output from people and inspire the most creativity and collaboration and all that kind of stuff, that's great for everyone, not just the creators, but we're also in a world where people are creating, and they're not like if we have a basic income, they're not starving either.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I would say, and I'm sure you disagree with me strongly, Rob.
Yeah.
Well, you care. I think a world without copyrights is going to be better overall for people.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I mean, like I read this article, and I encourage you guys who haven't checked this out to check out this article. And like I said at the beginning, I think it was before you guys got here. I read this article, and he is arguing for abolishing copyrights, and he's like really convincing, but he's got opinions. And I was reading it, and I was like, wow, we shouldn't have copyrights. But then I was like, but what about all these people who are making money from these jobs? Not just the creative people, but the people in the publishing and distribution industries, and there's all of these kinds of jobs that have to do with intellectual property, and those jobs just go away. But it doesn't take away the economy's capacity to produce that stuff. So that's when I first started thinking of the idea of a basic income in the first place. Because I think if you just take away copyrights on their own, you're eliminating people's source of income. And we already live in a world where most creative people are not earning very much money, but it's still something.
But you produce the stuff, you have to get it to the people. So like you produce something.
Yeah.
Distribution channel. So what is my incentive to make someone buy something he created?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, what is if I could just take what he created and make it my own, and then also benefit?
Well, no one's gonna buy it from you either. Because they can just take it. Yeah. Yeah.
No. But
I think he's saying
I'm saying like this person needs what he created. Like I'm not saying like they still need it. Like they don't want to create. They actually need the product. Like you know what I'm saying? I'm interested in the market, but he created it. Now I don't have to acknowledge him. I can still direct and source. So now it becomes a thing of who can create the biggest distribution channel, And now if you create a bigger distribution channel, now it's like the creators are wiped out in that sense. Am I wrong? I don't know.
I'm not sure I understand.
Stolen from, kind of.
Yeah, like it
Like,
becomes now the district, like it becomes now the creator doesn't even need to be acknowledged in a sense. Because now you need the product. I know how to get it to you. It's like you need what I have, but I don't have to acknowledge him anymore. So now you get what I'm saying?
I do think it's important to acknowledge creators. I think people should still get credit for their work, and I think that's still enforceable even without copyrights.
I think that's like what copyright does. Like it allows you to legally protect the things you create. Like it allows you to say you cannot copy. I have the right to copy this. You cannot print. I can't make a CD. Like okay, like say you have cars. You have cars, and he created a CD of music.
Yeah.
He owns the copyright to that music, or the label owns it. So me, as an independent distributor, I cannot illegally download this music, put it on a CD, and sell it. Now I can, but he also has the right to protect that copyright.
Sure.
So now if he doesn't have that right, that means everyone in this room can find people who want this CD if it's in demand. And he doesn't need to be acknowledged. And so he can be at home start like
What do you mean he doesn't need to be? What do you mean by acknowledged?
Monetarily. He doesn't need to be part of the system. So he could be the most famous, now he can be the most famous musician in the world.
Yeah.
And be starving.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think that
Karl Marx.
Like or like who was the painter who died, bro?
Van Gogh.
A lot of them.
No, he's after death. Van Gogh. You know what I'm saying? Because no one, he wasn't properly. Like
I think you're right, and I think that's why it's dangerous to do something like this and just remove an entire market for something without having some kind of alternative in place. That having to be like a basic.
What you've been saying, like when it comes to the things will still be produced.
Yeah.
But I think production. I personally don't think production is as valuable as proper distribution.
So proper distribution in that the person who created it gets
the person who needs it gets it. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? Like you can make whatever. I can make 100 things. It doesn't get. If it's on an island, it's on an island. You know what I'm saying? Like
nobody benefits.
No one benefits, no matter how much I can create. If the person who needs it doesn't get it and aren't aware of it, then it's useless in that sense.
So we do have the internet. So we have the technology to kind of distribute everything. But that's different from saying that people are going to know where to look to get the thing they need.
Yeah, and that's like a needle in a haystack in a sense.
So I think there's always going to be a market for curation of content. Like like you're not going to just want to listen to everybody's random music that they banged out and what they're doing.
That brings so then what I think is that brings the wrap around of the exact system that is right now. I don't know. You get what I'm saying? Like that's just what I'm visualizing. Like, and they're doing this is actually currently happening in the music industry. When it comes to now, people don't call labels, but they're doing the exact same thing that labels do. Like Spotify signing artists to advances for licensing and sync, and they're making music curation, but they're not a record label, but they're doing everything a record label does. But so are we just changing the name here? Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, I think that's part of it. I think it's also the amount of money is changing. So like Spotify pays a lot less than the traditional record label would have paid for the music that they buy and that kind of thing.
And we pay a lot less, right? Because now we have like almost infinite music for $10.
You're not buying $10 CDs.
Right.
You get like
You're paying $10 a month and you're getting all the CDs.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so it's getting cheaper, right?
So, but I think you're right that it is kind of this gradual transition that's happening, and technology is enabling that, regardless of what the copyright law happens to be. And I think, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just saying, like, so I'm sort of imagining, like, so like there's you would still have a market for creation systems, and so say if we had a basic income, everyone had enough money to like do whatever they want. You could potentially have sort of a market that doesn't really exist now, where people are like, oh, what I want to do is like listen to like all of the like rap music that is like coming out from all over the place and like curate that and be like, I'm listening to like random shit on Twitter and like, you know, I'm like my friends who like are in downtown LA are like sending me their like cell phone videos and I'm curating this and then people are like, oh hey, like this person's really the person you go to for like indie rap stuff and so then they're like, oh, I would want to listen to more of this and maybe like, you know, like because it's still going to be like credited. Like I'm just curating it. I'm not interested in being like, oh, I'm gonna like copy all this and say it's mine. I just want to be like, I want to have like the best rap collection. And so people are like, oh, I really like that artist. I'm gonna like look them up and be like, oh, hey, I'm gonna follow you on Instagram now. And like maybe you're like gonna do at like a house show where my cousin lives, and maybe I'll like fly see my cousin and like go to your house show. So is that helpful in thinking about how?
I think that's what's happening currently without removal of copyright. You know, like that's what I just think copyright helps protect you. Like, that's all. Like I think that everything you just said, like people do that currently. Like corporations, they have their own blogs, they have their own. Everyone's a creator now. You got Instagram, you got Twitter, but the most important thing is that if you see something a million times, someone should be benefiting monetarily from that. Do you get what I'm saying? So if each of us are a distribution system, the person who is the base should be benefiting monetarily. I think.
That part of under kind of like getting paid what you deserve for
And I don't know how that would be without copyright. How that would be properly monitored.
You wouldn't have it at all without copyright.
Yeah. So you wouldn't
So
get
I don't know.
Go ahead, Chris.
So I think so. I want to say two things. One, this whole curation thing is basically it sounds like you can be a critic and critics basically have different opinions and all that stuff, and that's all fine and dandy. But even the critics saying like, okay, look, this is what I think is the best, and then even if it is the best, if you take away the copyright, even the critics' list can be someone else's list, right? Sure. And so then you would say, so let's say Elizabeth made this fantastic list, and then Richard takes the list, doesn't say that it was Elizabeth's originally, and then I take it, and then Mira takes it, and no one respects the other person for it. So there's no value even in that list then.
So this is a separate issue from copyright. This is about credit, and this is about naming your sources, like where you got various things. Mm-hmm. So you can get rid of copyright, but you're still going to have to give credit for where you got the list from.
How would you enforce that? Because I think a lot of people are confused.
I mean, it's not something that's perfectly enforceable, just like it isn't now, even with copyright. But without copyright, you can admit to copying something. So there's more incentive to say, oh, I got it from here. Whereas now with copyright, if you're copying something, that's illegal. So you want to hide the fact that you're copying.
But let's say that like somebody took my list and said it was their list.
Yeah.
What recourse do I have without copyright? Is there like another law or?
Right. So with copyright, you have no recourse if they're hiding the fact that they took your list.
But I can try to sue and show that it was my list originally.
Well, you can do that. You can do that without copyright too.
That's what I'm wondering. Like, under what law am I doing that without copyright?
That's separate from copyright.
What is it called? It's like a.
That's just like plagiarism
Plagiarism
and
or something?
yeah, like credit for your work and that kind of thing. You can sue someone for stealing for saying I created this, and yeah, that's separate from copyright. But
I think that is copyright.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion.
Copyright is the right to copy it and use it without paying and distribute it without paying. Yeah. But it's not saying you can do that. Go ahead.
I think you might be getting at that idea that Bethany said is just general theft.
Right.
Like you would just say that I'm the one who I made this and you stole it from me.
Right.
And then prove that you're the one who made it.
Right.
Yeah.
So what Chris was saying, like the list of curators, like you can without copyright, you can take that list from Elizabeth, and that's fine, but and share it and all of that. But if you're saying I created the list, there's still a problem there.
But now, if it's general theft, now wouldn't it be?
I mean, that still implies that you had ownership in the first place.
Yeah.
Like you should still get credit as a creator.
Gotcha. Okay.
But that's different from getting paid.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, let's basic no money. No money.
Yeah.
When you create something.
Yeah.
And without copyright, do you own?
You own the credit for creating it. Yeah.
But you don't own it.
I don't know what that means.
So when you own something,
Yeah.
I can get it. I can throw it away. I can do it, but so everyone owns it. Do you understand? Like, that's what ownership is.
I would say everyone
I can do
owns it.
whatever I want with what I own.
Anyone can do whatever they want, but they can't take credit for something that you created. Like, that's not okay. Now, they might try to do that anyway. Like, people might try to get away with that. They might try to plagiarize and that kind of thing. But the beauty of not having copyright is that there's less incentive to do something like that. You could admit that I took this guy's thing and did something with it and not get in trouble. So people are going to be copying each other anyway. But without copyright, now you can say, hey, I'm copying people. Like, these are the people I copied. These are my inspirations. This is where I'm getting this stuff. And there's maybe going to be less of this kind of stealing of ideas and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So basically,
yeah.
I had a second point.
Okay.
So just don't let me forget that. All right.
Okay.
So on this line that
yeah.
you're distinguishing copyright from plagiarism in terms of copyright being I can take and multiply something else versus plagiarism is I can take something, claim that I originated it,
yes.
and then multiply it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
That's a really good.
Credit.
Yeah.
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 So basically, before I get to the second point, then removing the copyright law and removing copyright limitations, you're granting the process of distribution.
Yes.
Right. What you're saying is you'd have to enforce credit. You'd still have to enforce citing of the sources who the original creator was.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there's perfect ways to do this, and there certainly isn't today. But if you remove the monetary aspect of it, there's less incentive to actively hide who your sources are when you're copying someone.
See, when it comes to that, I think that just makes me like if I see that I'm just talking about me personally. If Michael Jackson Thriller, I'm trying to print out 1,000 copies and get to it. You get what I'm saying? Like I'm where people love Michael Jackson. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, you could do that. But no one's gonna believe that you made that music.
Yeah,
everyone knows it's Michael Jackson.
Yeah. I'm not Michael Jackson.
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? But it's just like I'm talking about things that have already been made and already have that stature where it's sold 10 like not diamond 10 million records.
Probably.
It sold an outrageous amount of records. You know what I'm saying? So where without that, I become Best Buy. You know what I'm saying? I become the distributor if I want to do that.
Sure. Yeah.
So this is.
Is this your second point?
Yeah. So this leads to my second point. Basically, the person that actually monetizes and benefits is not the creator. It's not only is it the distributor. It's the person. It's like YouTube. YouTube benefits from its creators.
Yeah.
The creators don't. At this point, the creators are benefiting less and less because YouTube is the one that distributes, controls, manages, and YouTube is the first thing that everyone goes to.
Yeah.
So in the end, you could say YouTube is the creative output, but really they're not. They're giving it, right?
Yeah.
But how do you manage YouTube then? How do you ensure that the originators and the creators on YouTube actually get what they deserve? Because otherwise, it's just YouTube that controls everything anyway.
Instead of, I don't really. The question of what people deserve is not really something that's that interesting to me.
You put it up there.
I put it up there because I know it's interesting to the group.
Yeah.
So I think you're right that YouTube is going to be the one that's monetizing this because they're the ones that are providing the service that that people are using, and there's kind of a way to monetize it. Like there are lots of things in the world, and that we do in our lives that can't be monetized, that it doesn't make sense to monetize. And all I'm saying is that creative work should be in that category because we have the technology that we can distribute it for free. So is it, I don't know if I would assign any kind of like moral thing to YouTube. Like they're providing the service where you can watch all this stuff and maybe they're showing you ads and that's how they're monetizing it or something like that. Someone else could do that if you want. Maybe someone could come along and say, hey, we're just going to put it all on BitTorrent because now there's no copyrights anymore. So YouTube is obsolete. YouTube doesn't have to get the licenses to anything or something like that. And yeah.
I want to talk a little more about 1 and 4.
Okay.
Because like Yeah, so let's ignore for a minute what people deserve. You know, what do we need to do to incentivize the content to like actually go up on YouTube or whatever? And
Right.
in given that we might need to incentivize some of it, how do we deal with the fact that some people just have a lot more money to throw at things and just make like the things that they want to have happen?
I think that's a good question. I have some quotes from the article. I think I have one that's relevant to this. Does anyone else have
Could
any
I
thoughts?
interject something right
Yeah.
for that?
Yeah.
So, running short on time. I had a lot of problems with this article. I think that I honestly think that the author misrepresents some things that he claims, specifically Mark Twain. He talks about Mark Twain going to, this and all that. And Mark Twain was actually an advocate of copyright and extending and lengthening copyright protection. So anyways, I think there was a good bit of sort of factual sort of problems with the article. And while you're still looking, I went to, there's something called Penn New England. It's sort of a major writers group, advocacy group, or how you do. But anyway, so if you're a professional writer, whatever, you might be a member of Penn and Penn New England. And I forget it was the annual awards ceremony, and so the Penn New England director or president, whatever her position was, as part of her introductory remarks for the person who was going to win the Writers Awards for the year, kind of railed against Google and Google Books and Google digitizing books. And I tried to talk to her after the meeting, about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And this being Massachusetts, somebody interrupted. And,
Whether digitizing books is a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes, yeah. And her position was she was railing against Google and sort of imploring the crowd the audience to get involved in figuring out a way to stop Google and to stop digitization of books. And with, like this was, a book is the author's baby. It's I rolled it and they love it and they warm it and all this kind of stuff. and I'm thinking to myself, you might not be as upset if you would just write books that somebody wants to read. And then you might actually look at Google and say, Google's kind of getting me exposure, getting me attention, and that might be a good thing. So, anyway, I'm not sure. What I wanted to really ask the woman is, what are the creative ways that you can, write books and still make money from them that might be better than just an archaic notion, I'm going to say, about copyright and protection of written work. Because I think really at the base, what she wanted to do, she wants all authors to make the same amount of money, so to speak, to be able to write and be able to make their livelihood on writing. And the reality in the writing market is a very small percentage of the authors earn 95% of all the earnings from authorship. 5% go to everybody else.
So
you can't live on it.
What she wants is a basic income and also someone telling her that she's getting this basic income because she's an author. So here's the quote, and I think we'll end on this quote that's relevant to Bethany's point and powerful interests in content and all of that. So this is from the article, He's Imagining a Future Without Copyright. And he says, does this mean that in the future we'll have to scrutinize all creative works for signs of hidden corporate sponsorship? Perhaps, but this is nothing new. Product placement was invented in the context of traditional copyright and has flourished there, as it probably would anywhere. Copyright is neither the cause of corporate sponsorship nor its antidote. To look to the publishing industry as a force for decommercialization would be weirdly out of touch indeed.
Not sure I'm totally convinced because I think it's a matter of degree. But
Yeah.
See, I made a note of that quote too, and then my note to myself was, and if found, do what? And who decides and applies the sanctions?
Right.
Yeah. So these are.
It basically sounds like the exact system of distribution today where they get these creators, they get the creators for as cheap as possible, they brand them as well as they can, and the ones with the attention get the money.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what is currently going on.
Yeah, except you might see them instead of the superstars collecting royalties, you might see people paying them to do their next album like ahead of time or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's
Which
what I'm
means the
worried about
people,
for.
the people will control the artistic output.
To some degree.
That's what I'm worried
I don't
about
know.
with like.
Then it's
Pay
like-
somebody
yeah.
who
So-
wasn't already a superstar.
That's
So-
what I'm worried about with wealth and controlling.
Yeah.
artistic
So I
output.
love that when we end these, we always want to talk more. That's always a good sign. But we got to wrap it up for today. Next week is an exciting week because
It is. You should all come.
you should all come next week because I'm going to be talking about my project that I'm working on.
I'm for sure plug it in.
Yeah. So I'm building a basic income system that's kind of like PayPal, but you get free money every day.
Oh,
So yeah,
Crypto or a
non-crypto.
oh, you don't like crypto?
I don't like crypto.
I don't know like anything.
Yeah.
Like anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.